One of the great loves of your life that you write about is Tracy Chapman. Are you worried about how she'll receive this?
Not especially.
Why?
Yeah, because it's my life.
And I take it you're not someone that, particularly enjoys being out in the public eye apart from your music.
Yeah, I'm not much drawn to the limelight.
We don't see you in the tabloids, for example.
I hope not.
The latest news about Tracy Chapman is leaving fans speechless. Tracy Chapman spent 30 years keeping her sexuality private, but her former lover just shattered that silence.
I didn't expect it, of course. I had no idea what was coming.
The betrayal involved stolen money, lawsuits, and a public outing that destroyed everything Chapman had built.
If she didn't want people to know, we should not have dated. We should not have.
This is how a forbidden love affair became the scandal that drove America's most private artist into 15 years of complete silence. On March 30th, 1964, Tracy Chapman entered a world that would never quite know what to do with her. Born to Hazel and George Chapman, her childhood was marked by divorce when she was just 4 years old. Her mother raised Tracy and her older sister in a predominantly black working-class neighborhood called South Broadway, where music flowed through their modest home like a constant heartbeat. Tracy's mother sang. Her sister could sing. Music wasn't just entertainment in the Chapman household. It was survival, a way to find beauty in struggle.
There was always music in the house. I think I was singing as soon as I could talk, and I also started playing instruments very early on.
When Tracy was 8 years old, she picked up a guitar and began writing songs, channeling emotions she couldn't yet understand into melodies that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her years. The young girl who spent hours in the public library, who loved books more than socializing, was already learning to use music as both shield and sword.
And I spent a lot of my time at the public library. It was one of the few places my mother would let me go on my own. And I actually wrote poetry and short stories before I started writing songs.
She attended Episcopal High School and later the Worcester School before landing at Tufts University, where she studied anthropology. But it was at Tufts where her destiny truly began to unfold. Performing at the university's radio station, Tracy caught the attention of fellow student Brian Koppelman, who smuggled a demo tape to his father, Charles Koppelman. That tape contained a song called "Talking About a Revolution," and it would change everything.
While they're standing in the welfare lines.
By 1987, Tracy Chapman had graduated from college and signed with Elektra Records. Her self-titled debut album, released in 1988, was supposed to be a modest folk release that might find a small, dedicated audience. Instead, it exploded across the cultural landscape like a lightning strike. The album's lead single, Fast Car, told the story of escape, of two people desperate to leave their circumstances behind and build something better together.
You get a fast car. I want a ticket to anywhere.
But there was something about the way Chapman sang, something about the deliberately genderless pronouns she used, something about the yearning in her voice that made certain listeners feel seen in ways they'd never experienced before. Young queer women, particularly lesbians, began claiming Fast Car as their anthem, reading between the lines of Chapman's carefully chosen words. The song became more than music. It became a secret handshake, a coded message that said, "You are not alone," to people who desperately needed to hear it. June 11th, 1988, Wembley Stadium, London. Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday tribute concert was meant to celebrate the imprisoned South African leader and protest apartheid. 90,000 people packed the venue, while 600 million watched on television worldwide. The lineup read like a who's who of music royalty: Sting, Whitney Houston, George Michael, Dire Straits. And then there was Tracy Chapman, a 24-year-old folk singer with one album, scheduled for a brief afternoon performance. She was nervous, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment and the presence of her musical heroes backstage. But when Stevie Wonder encountered technical difficulties and couldn't perform his scheduled set, Organizers made a desperate decision: ask the young woman with the guitar to fill the gap. Tracy Chapman walked back onto that massive stage and performed Fast Car for hundreds of millions of people. Her voice, clear and steady despite her nerves, carried across the stadium and into living rooms around the world.
You get a fast car. I want a ticket to anywhere. Maybe we.
In that moment, she transformed from a promising new artist into a global phenomenon. The performance catapulted Fast Car to the top of charts worldwide. Chapman's debut album sold 6 million copies in the United States alone, with 1 million sold in just the first week. She won 3 Grammy Awards, including Best New Artist, and suddenly found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never wanted and was completely unprepared for. But fame came with unexpected consequences. The same qualities that made Fast Car resonate so deeply with LGBTQ+ listeners. The gender-neutral lyrics, the themes of escape, Chapman's own androgynous appearance and deep voice also made her a target for speculation. In an era when being openly gay could destroy careers, Chapman found herself walking a tightrope between authenticity and survival. Music journalists began asking pointed questions about her personal life. Fans started reading coded messages into every song lyric. The woman who had always been intensely private suddenly found her every movement scrutinized for clues about her sexuality. Tracy Chapman had become famous for singing about escape, but now she was trapped in a prison of public curiosity that would follow her for the rest of her career.
And I take it you're not someone who, particularly enjoys being out in the public eye apart from your music.
Yeah, I'm not much drawn to the limelight.
We don't see you in the tabloids, for example.
I hope not.
Mid-1990s, Brooklyn, New York. 2 of the most powerful voices in American culture were about to collide in a love affair that would remain secret for decades. Alice Walker, author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel The Color Purple, was approaching 50 and at the height of her literary fame. Tracy Chapman was in her late 20s, still riding the wave of her musical success, but increasingly uncomfortable with the spotlight. Their relationship began as a meeting of artistic minds. Both women understood the weight of being Black voices in predominantly white industries. Both had used their platforms to address social justice and human rights. But what started as mutual respect quickly became something deeper and more complex. Walker was captivated by Chapman's voice, not just her singing voice, but her entire presence.
It was her voice. There are some voices in our culture that can carry the whole culture, and really make an emotional sense of it and liberate you into a deep love of that.
For Chapman, Walker represented something she had rarely encountered. Someone who understood the burden of being a public figure while maintaining artistic integrity. Their relationship unfolded in Brooklyn, where both women lived at the time. They attended literary events together, spent quiet evenings discussing art and politics, and created a partnership that fed both their creative spirits. For Chapman, it was perhaps the first time she had found someone who understood both her talent and her need for privacy. But their love affair existed in the shadows by necessity. The 1990s were not a time when Black lesbian celebrities could live openly without facing career suicide. Chapman had already experienced enough speculation about her sexuality to know that confirmation would fundamentally change how her music was received and marketed. Walker, having already established her literary reputation, was more willing to be open about the relationship within their social circles. But Chapman's need for privacy created tension that would eventually contribute to their downfall.
If she didn't want people to know, we should not have dated. We should not have.
The relationship lasted approximately 2 years, during which time they became deeply intertwined in each other's lives. Walker even attended the funeral of Chapman's mother, standing by her side during one of the most difficult moments of Chapman's life. But love, no matter how genuine, couldn't overcome the fundamental differences in how they approached fame and public life. In 1996, what should have been a simple business investment became the explosive end of one of music's most secretive relationships. Rebecca Walker, Alice's daughter from her marriage to civil rights lawyer Melvin Leventhal, had ambitious plans to open Cocoa Bar, the first cyber cafe owned and operated by black women. Chapman, flush with the success of her music career and deeply committed to supporting black-owned businesses, invested $60,000 in the venture. It seemed like the perfect intersection of her values and her resources, helping to create opportunities for women who looked like her in an emerging technology space. But Cocoa Bar struggled from the beginning. When Rebecca Walker and her business partner Angel Williams failed to repay Chapman according to their agreement, the situation quickly turned ugly. Chapman, feeling betrayed by people she had trusted because of their connection to Alice, made a decision that would haunt all parties involved. She sued.
And I think also just as you get older, you get a better sense of yourself and what it is you want and what you need to do in your life.
The legal action wasn't just about money, it was about principle and respect. Chapman had invested in good faith, supporting other black women's entrepreneurial dreams, only to find herself taken advantage of. When the court ruled in her favor, Chapman sent sheriff's deputies to seize assets from the failed cafe. $1,500 in cash, 25 chairs, 5 tables, and 2 coffee urns. Angel Williams was furious and hurt. Her public statement to the New York Times was devastating. If she doesn't give a hoot about people, that's fine. But then she shouldn't run around singing songs about saving the earth. The accusation painted Chapman as a hypocrite who sang about social justice while crushing struggling black businesswomen. But the real damage came from the timing. Chapman's relationship with Alice Walker was already under strain, and the lawsuit against Alice's daughter created an impossible situation. Alice found herself caught between loyalty to her daughter and her love for Chapman. Rebecca Walker's girlfriend at the time allegedly posted a letter on the front of the shuttered cafe that outed Chapman publicly, turning a private business dispute into a very public revelation about Chapman's sexuality. The relationship with Alice Walker didn't survive the fallout.
I didn't expect it, of course. I had no idea what was coming.
Chapman learned a brutal lesson about the intersection of love, money, and public life, and how quickly private pain could become public spectacle. In 2000, Chapman entered a Nashville recording studio to work on what would become her 5th album, Telling Stories. But this wasn't just another collection of folk songs. This was Chapman's way of processing the betrayal, heartbreak, and disillusionment that had consumed her life since the breakup with Alice Walker.
Fiction in the space between you and me.
The album's title track became her most pointed artistic statement about the relationship and its aftermath. The lyrics spoke of fiction existing in the space between the lines on pages of memories, of writing things down that didn't necessarily mean truth, of people just telling stories. It was a devastating artistic clapback that took Chapman 10 years to craft and release. For those who knew the backstory, Telling Stories read like a direct response to Walker's tendency to publicize their private relationship. Chapman had always maintained that her personal life should remain personal. But Walker had different ideas about the intersection of art and autobiography.
If she didn't want people to know, we should not have dated. We should not have.
The song suggested that Walker's version of their relationship, the version she would eventually publish in journals and share in interviews, was itself a kind of fiction, a story crafted for public consumption rather than private truth. It was Chapman's way of fighting back against someone who had used their love as material for public revelation. But Telling Stories also revealed Chapman's deepest fear, that in a world where everyone wanted to claim ownership of her story, her own voice was being drowned out. The media wanted to define her sexuality. Fans wanted to project their own desires onto her music. Former lovers wanted to use their relationship as content for books and interviews. Chapman was tired of being everyone else's story, instead of being allowed to tell her own. The album marked a turning point in Chapman's relationship with fame and the music industry. Each subsequent release would be met with smaller audiences and less commercial success, as if Chapman was deliberately pulling away from the spotlight that had brought her so much pain. By 2008's Our Bright Future, Chapman had essentially retired from active recording, disappearing into a private life that she guarded more fiercely than ever.
I remember there was a time when I used to.
In 2009, Chapman's final LA tour ended not with fanfare or celebration, but with a quiet retreat that would last over a decade. The woman who had once filled stadiums and won Grammy Awards simply stepped away from the music industry, choosing privacy over profit and peace over performance. The decision wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of years of growing discomfort with fame and its intrusions. Chapman had always been shy, more comfortable with books than with red carpets. She had entered the music business to share her art, not to become a celebrity, and the two had proven impossible to separate. But the final straw wasn't just about general discomfort with fame. It was about the specific ways that speculation about her sexuality had made every public appearance a potential minefield. Journalists would ask leading questions. Fans would analyze her appearance for clues about her personal life. LGBTQ+ organizations would claim her as a symbol without her consent.
I'm taking a break from touring.
Yeah, for how long?
Well, I don't know how long it'll be, maybe a year.
Chapman retreated to Northern California, where she bought a modest home and began living the quiet life she had always craved. She gardened, read voraciously, took long walks, and spent time with her 2 dogs. For the first time since 1988, she could move through the world without worrying about paparazzi or gossip columns. The music industry moved on without her. New artists claimed the folk pop space she had pioneered. Streaming services made her catalog available to new generations, but Chapman herself remained invisible. She gave no interviews, made no public appearances, and seemed content to let her music speak for itself while she disappeared entirely. But disappearing came with its own costs. Chapman's absence from the cultural conversation meant that other people got to define her legacy. Critics debated the meaning of her songs without her input. LGBTQ+ historians claimed her as a lesbian icon, while she remained silent about her own identity. The woman who had inspired millions with songs about finding your voice had chosen to stop using her own voice entirely. In 2022, Alice Walker sat across from Gayle King on CBS Mornings, promoting her new memoir, Gathering Blossoms Under Fire: The Journals of Alice Walker. For decades, Walker had remained relatively quiet about her relationship with Chapman, respecting the younger woman's fierce need for privacy. But now, at 78, Walker had decided that her life belonged to her to tell, regardless of how Chapman might feel about it.
Are you worried about how she'll receive this?
Not especially.
Why?
Yeah, because it's my life.
King asked about Chapman, and Walker's response was both tender and brutal. She described Chapman as one of her great loves, spoke about being instantly attracted to her voice and presence, and detailed their relationship with an intimacy that Chapman had never consented to making public. When King suggested that Chapman might not appreciate Walker discussing their relationship, Walker's response was devastating. "It's my life. If she didn't want people to know, we should not have dated." The statement was a complete repudiation of Chapman's decades-long commitment to privacy. Walker was essentially arguing that dating her meant consenting to having that relationship become public property. It was the ultimate violation of the boundaries Chapman had tried so hard to maintain. The interview made headlines across entertainment and LGBTQ+ media. After years of speculation, here was confirmation from a credible source about Chapman's sexuality and romantic history. But the confirmation came without Chapman's consent or participation, making it feel more like exposure than revelation. Walker's memoir, which included detailed journal entries about their relationship, became another source of unwanted publicity for Chapman. The woman who had spent 30 years trying to keep her personal life private found it splashed across book reviews and entertainment blogs. Most painfully, Walker revealed that she and Chapman were no longer speaking. The relationship that had begun with such promise and love had devolved into estrangement and public betrayal.
Did you talk with her about including this in your book, your relationship with her?
Not at all, because we're not really talking.
After a love so deep.
Yes.
Chapman's silence in response to Walker's revelations spoke louder than any statement could have. She had spent her career proving that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. On February 4th, 2024, in Los Angeles, the Crypto.com arena erupted in shocked applause as Tracy Chapman walked onto the Grammy Awards stage with her guitar. It had been nearly 4 years since her last public appearance, and 14 years since she had performed at a major televised event. Standing beside country star Luke Combs, who had turned Fast Car into a country #1 hit, Chapman looked both nervous and determined. At 59, her hair was grayer. Her face carried the lines of someone who had lived through decades of scrutiny. But her voice remained as powerful and clear as it had been at Wembley Stadium 36 years earlier. The duet performance of Fast Car was electric. Chapman's original version had made her famous, but Combs's cover had introduced the song to an entirely new generation of listeners. Together, they bridged genres, generations, and the complex racial dynamics that had always surrounded the song's success. For Chapman, the Grammy performance was more than just a rare public appearance. It was a reclaiming of her narrative. After years of other people telling her story, defining her sexuality, and speculating about her choices, she was finally ready to remind the world why her voice had mattered in the first place. The performance sent the original version of Fast Car surging to the top of iTunes charts. New fans discovered Chapman's music for the first time, while longtime listeners remembered why they had fallen in love with her voice decades earlier. But perhaps most importantly, Chapman's appearance demonstrated that she was still alive, still creating, and still in control of her own story. The woman who had been outed, betrayed, and exploited by people she trusted had survived it all. In recent interviews promoting the rare appearance, Chapman has remained true to form, gracious about Combs's success with the song, grateful for new audiences discovering her music, but still fiercely protective of her privacy. She continues to live quietly in Northern California, where she gardens, reads, and occasionally writes songs that may never see the light of day. The speculation about her sexuality continues. Probably always will. But Chapman has learned that the only way to win the game of public curiosity is to refuse to play it at all. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.